All right. I think we have people entering the Zoom room. And with that, I can begin an introduction. My name is Shannon Jackson. I'm Associate Vice Chancellor for the Arts and Design at Berkeley, and I want to welcome you to A+D Mondays. Many of you know, if you've tuned in the last semester or tuned in over the years, that this is a series that usually takes place in the beautiful theater of BAM PFA. And many of you also know, some of you also know that this series is attached to a course, Humanities 20, Exploring the Arts and Design at Berkeley. And I want to welcome those enrolled students to the group tonight. Many of you also do know that the series is co-curated by a range of campus organizations so that we can provide an entree for students and community to engage creatively with so much that goes on at UC Berkeley, intellectually, creatively, socially, and politically. It's co-curated with organizations such as the African American Student Development Office, the Berkeley Center for New Media, the Department of Art Practice, the Department of Theater, Dance, and Performance Studies, Cal Performances, BAM PFA, College of Environmental Design, the Future Histories Lab, and tonight's co-host, the Graduate School of Journalism. In fact, tonight is the third time we've had the privilege of hosting a showcase with the J School, the second this year and the first of the new semester. I also want to remind you or tell newcomers for the first time that the series this year is orchestrated under a central theme: together, reinventing politics, reimagining health. And we collectively came up with that theme in order to acknowledge our shared commitment to investigating the politics and aesthetics of gathering, of being together at a time when the nature of gathering, online and offline, as our political selves, as our embodied selves, as our intellectual selves, is constantly undergoing redefinition. I want to tell you a little bit more about the plan tonight, but before I do, I also want to acknowledge that the politics and aesthetics of togetherness becomes more urgent when we also acknowledge the land on which this gathering takes place, the land on which the University of California, Berkeley sits. Berkeley is sited on the unceded and ancestral land of the Ohlone people. In acknowledging the deep history of the Ohlone people and their connection to this land, we acknowledge not only the past, but also the fact that the Ohlone people are flourishing members of the Berkeley community and of the Bay Area more generally. Many of us who gather routinely for this series and other courses all acknowledge and believe Berkeley to be a special place, but we know we are not the first to gather and celebrate this place on which we have the privilege of calling our campus. Dorothea Lange was a photographer who knew something about the politics and aesthetics of place, and also someone who knew something about what it meant to work aesthetically, socially, and intellectually at a time when the parameters of being together were also undergoing necessary redefinition. As a way to honor the legacy of her practice, one formed during the WPA's own attempts to redefine equity and collective care across the country, I'm thrilled now to be able to welcome an event devoted to those who have received, over the last few years and decades, the Dorothea Lange Fellowship at the Graduate School of Journalism. The event tonight is going to be moderated by the first ever recipient of the fellowship, Ken Light, and I'll be turning it over to him in just a minute, but not before welcoming him and thanking him for being our fearless leader. I cannot do justice to his biography in a brief introduction, but let me remind all of you that Ken Light is a American social documentary photographer and the Reva and David Logan Professor of Photojournalism at the J School. As somebody who has published and been at the center as a photographer of over 10 monographs, I won't be able to list all of them, but let me say that Ken Light is known now nationally and internationally for being a photographer who has the uncanny capacity to isolate social transformation in the still of a camera, an isolation that is always rendered with incredible political acuity, but also with incredible aesthetic delicacy. Dorothea Lange would have been proud of this gathering tonight, and it is with a sense of pride myself that I turn the screen over to Ken Light to lead our event. So Ken, over to you.
Thank you so much, Shannon. I really appreciate the welcome, and we're so happy to be part of this great yearly event. And I want to welcome all of you who have tuned in to listen and hear about Dorothea Lange and the Dorothea Lange Fellowship, and share some of the great images that some of the winners of the fellowship have received. I want to start out by talking some about Dorothea Lange and her work. And let me share my screen and start the slideshow. Sorry, there we go. So Dorothea Lange is one of the greatest documentary photographers in the history of photography. We're proud to have a fellowship at Berkeley in her name. Each year it is awarded to a graduate student to work on an in-depth project in the tradition of social documentary photography that Lange worked. Let me share with you a little bit about Lange's life and work, and then we'll hear the voices of 4 Lange Fellowship winners, all students and graduates of Berkeley Journalism. They will share photographs and talk about the impact of receiving this prestigious award. In 1918, Dorothea Lange moved to San Francisco and soon opened her own portrait studio, which she operated for more than 10 years. It was only after the stock market crash in 1929 and the onset of the Depression that Lange began to photograph unemployed laborers, the documentary work that eventually secured her a position with the Farm Security Administration. In 1932, Lange left her studio to photograph what was just outside her door, a rapidly growing population of homeless crowding the streets of the city. Within the year, she had virtually abandoned her commercial work to make what her first husband, painter Maynard Dixon, described as photographs of the forgotten man. Lange photographed labor strikes and other mass demonstrations with an uncanny ability. In the early 1930s, Lange, married in an unhappy marriage, met Paul Taylor, a UC Berkeley professor and labor economist who's pictured on the right. Their attraction was immediate, and by 1935, both had left their respective spouses to be with each other. They rented a house at 2706 Virginia Street in Berkeley, and in 1940, they moved nearby to 1163 Euclid Street, which is a few blocks up from Berkeley Journalism's home in Northgate Hall. Lange lived and worked in the secluded house until her death in 1965. In early May of 34, West Coast longshoremen walked off the job striking after demonstrations turned violent in San Francisco, resulting in the police shooting deaths of 2 men. A general strike involving almost 150,000 workers shut down the city for 4 days. Lange's photographs from this period were exhibited at photographer Willard Van Dyke's Oakland Gallery during the summer of 1934, making the first public exhibition of Lange's new documentary work. Paul Taylor at UC, and then focusing on migrant labor and water issues in California, saw Lange's photos and contacted her about using a photograph to illustrate an article he had written about the strike. The article, with a full-page reproduction of Lange's image, was published in Survey Graphic in 1934, captioned "Workers Unite." This marked the beginning of a lifetime professional and personal collaboration with Taylor, whom she married in 1935. White Angel Breadline is Lange's first photographic effort, undertaken outside the comfort of her San Francisco studio, an exercise that helped cultivate the style that would inform her work for the FSA. The view she captured of the hungry and unemployed men lined up outside a soup kitchen was a familiar one in American cities during the Depression. The particular food bank known as the White Angel Jungle was very close to her studio. Lange's image became an icon of the period, capturing the prevalence of human isolation and despair. Over the next 5 years, the couple traveled extensively, often together, documenting the rural hardships they encountered for the Farm Security Administration, which had been established by the US Department of Agriculture as part of the New Deal to tell the story of the plight of farmers hit hard by foreclosures and the drought that created the Dust Bowls. Paul Taylor would later note, Lange's access to the inner lives of these struggling Americans was the result of patience and careful consideration of the people she photographed. Her method of work, Taylor later said, was often to just saunter up to the people and look around, and then when she saw something that she wanted to photograph, to quietly take her camera, look at it, and see if she saw that they objected. She would close it up and not take a picture if they did, or perhaps she would wait until they were used to her. Lange's most famous photograph is referred to as the Migrant Mother, although that's not the title Lange gave it. I think it is one of the most powerful photographs of the human tragedy of the Great Depression. It shows Florence Thompson embracing her children as she looks off in the distance. While Thompson was in her 30s when the picture was taken, she looks haggard and worn out. It's interesting to see the original vintage print held in the Library of Congress collection, pictured here, where we can see a thumb holding the tarp. Lange felt it took away from the composition, and when she borrowed the negative from the FSA located in Washington, D.C., she actually, with her assistant, rubbed the finger out of the negative with rubbing salts, causing a falling out with her boss in Washington. She and Paul published their pioneering book, American Exodus, in 1939, with words and photos telling the story of this era. It was one of the masterpieces of the documentary genre. Following America's entrance into World War II, Lange was to photograph the internment of Japanese Americans. When Lange was engaged by the Office of War Information to record the internment, she was hired to demonstrate to the public that the process was orderly and peaceful. But Lange's masterful pictures portrayed the sorrow and injustice, and thus were censored and withheld from the public for more than 20 years. Japanese Children with Tags, Hayward, California, 1942, is particularly poignant and insightful as she witnessed the tragedy of the internment. Lange's keen sense of justice allowed her to make photographs that, while simple, held great power, like this billboard in Richmond, California. Chrissy Gardner, who I became friends with, had been Lange's assistant during the project. She told me that this work almost killed Dorothea, as she was emotionally tortured by what she was witnessing. The work was eventually published in a book, Executive Order 9066, in 1972, and it documented the internment of 110,000 Japanese Americans, bringing a visual record to a nation that had largely forgotten this time in American history. Following this work, Lange settled into life in Berkeley. She began to have grandchildren and try to settle into domestic life as Paul traveled, working in other countries as a labor consultant. This photograph was made in her yard on Euclid Street. In 1940, Lange became the first woman awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship. She continued to photograph what she saw as the transition of California after the war, and worked on a Life magazine story with Ansel Adams. Both were so competitive, Lange wanting to prove to Ansel that she could make landscape photos, and Ansel wanting to prove to Lange that he could photograph people. She photographed life, such as these shipyard workers in Richmond, and a series for Life magazine that she began in 1954, featuring the attorney, Martin Pulick, which grew out of her interest in how poor people were defended in the court system, photographed in Oakland, which by one account grew out of personal experience associated with her brother's arrest and trial. As she began to have health issues, she focused on making photographs in San Francisco, Berkeley, and Oakland, and even something as common as her neighbor holding a newly baked pie. This photo shows spring in Berkeley and downtown Oakland. The work she did during the Depression overshadowed her later photographs. Like so many photographers, Lange had had great difficulty getting financial support for her later projects, and recognition of her important contribution to the history of photography was just beginning. Her ultimate effort came when she was dying of an inoperable cancer of the esophagus and reviewing her life's work, preparing a retrospective exhibit for the New York Museum of Modern Art. Her one-person show would only be the 6th dedicated to a photographer and the first ever for a woman photographer. Despite her painstaking work in selecting images for the exhibit, Lange would not live to see the finished result. She died on October 11th, 1965, at the age 70, shortly before the MoMA retrospective opened to widespread acclaim Years later, Paul endowed the Dorothea Lange Fellowship, hoping that students in Berkeley would continue where Dorothea left off. This is a list of some of the winners. And tonight, it's very exciting to have 4 of the winners of the Dorothea Lange Fellowship. We're excited at the journalism school because for the last over 20 years, even though this is a campus-wide competition, the winners have all come out of Berkeley Journalism. Tonight we have Clara Mocry, class of 21, a second year. Wassam Al-Badri, class of 20, graduated last year. Steve Saldavar and Tristan Sphinxa, both old timers. Steve graduating in 2010 and Tristan Sphinxa graduating in 2005. So tonight, each of the photographers will talk a little bit about their work and what they've done and the influence of Dorothea Lange. And we're going to start off with Steve Saldavar. And Steve will join us in a few minutes. There you are, Steve. So Steve is a video journalist at the Los Angeles Times. He focused on documenting and celebrating Latino life in Southern California. Born in East LA, he can still be seen walking down Whittier Boulevard looking for his next story. He was the recipient of the 2010 Dorothea Lange Fellowship. And not to embarrass Steve, but I've told him this, the project he did in my class, in my photo class, I still show to my students. And we're going to be very lucky tonight to see some of those wonderful photographs he made of the quinceañera as part of a class project. So welcome, Steve. Thank you for joining us. And we look forward to seeing your work.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Ken. And thanks to the Berkeley Arts Design and J School for this partnership. That's really, really cool to see. So I'm Steve Saldavar, 2010 Dorothea Lange Fellow. 2010, just seemed like much simpler times, right? I'm a LA Times video journalist. I was born and reared in East LA, but did do my undergrad and grad at UC Berkeley. So go Bears. So I will share my screen and bring up the slides. Let's see. All right, let's see if we can. Okay. So Ken asked us to think about how the Lange Fellowship touched our lives. It's hard not to talk about how it helped shape my career without also acknowledging the teachers that supported us in ways big and small. For me, this all started with a small email or seemingly small email that turned out to be pretty big. To understand how the fellowship helped me, it might help to know where I was at the time. So a little bit of context. My time at UC Berkeley's J School wasn't always so easy. There were moments of confusion. I didn't always know what I wanted to focus on. It got to be that time of the semester where you had to finalize your schedule. I emailed Ken and asked something to the effect of, is it too late to join your photo class? I got back an email, one line really. Okay, Steve, show us what you can do. I don't have access to my Berkeley emails anymore, but I'm glad I kept this one kind of close to my heart. As a professional in the field, even years later, when I'm exhausted, when I'm working on stories and there are no breakthroughs coming, I go back to this email and it inspires me. Okay, Steve, show us what you can do. I took on the topic of American identity through documenting quinceañeras. The celebration for many Latinos when their daughter turns 15 is very special. It marks the time they enter womanhood. And I wanted to explore what it meant to be a girl in one culture, this American culture, and a woman in another. How do those two cultures, those two ideas juxtapose at this event? The project was about how other people see the quinceañera and how these quinceañeras see themselves, and really how that reflection doesn't always mirror. There was often a cultural duality taking place. I understood pretty quickly how hard the project was going to be. Maybe the hardest thing to do is to show the transition or conflict or mixed feelings inside someone. This is one conversation I needed to have with all the parents. I was not looking to capture traditional moments of the ceremony. I was not competing with the quinceañera photographer the family hired. I was not looking to organize the family portraits at these parties. I was looking for something else. I had to stop looking and start seeing. I was seeing moments of internal conflict. The moment of becoming a young woman, being just 15, not entirely like appreciating or understanding the expectations family has of you, and just kind of wanting to be yourself. After church services, this quinceañera asked the driver of the Hummer limo to stop at a McDonald's for fries and Big Macs. Now, keep in mind, they were headed to the banquet where a meal was waiting for them. I'm glad I hung out with them and didn't just assume to meet them at the banquet. I would have otherwise missed this moment. I looked for quinceañeras going to churches in Oakland and San Francisco and followed a few. Mostly all gave me equal moments like this, the kind of anxiety-inducing frantic pace of the ceremony and moments of quiet that you're reminded they're just kids. It's stressful for parents too. One thing you learn by doing this, there's a range of how much is invested in these ceremonies. Some can be very modest, but others are very expensive. And some parents find themselves saving up for just this moment. They also have to grapple with what all this means for their daughter and for them. I mean, this father in the back, kind of looking pensive and maybe a little worried. I'm always curious about transitions, and this is all about people. But what happens when a place is in transition? And the Lange Fellowship allowed me to go back home to East LA, where a new metro chain was just built. Los Angeles often gets talked about as being a desperate city. As poet Yeats once wrote, things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Well, people will often tell you LA has no center. And here was this project intending to connect communities and people together. For many years, you have to know, East LA has been often ignored unless it meant building a freeway that could cut through it and maybe getting you to somewhere else a little bit faster. And here was its newest visitor, right? The Metro Gold Line. So there was anxiety about what that would do to the neighborhood, which is mostly Latino, mostly working class. There were fears about displacement. There was anxiety about gentrification. And frankly, the suspicion was earned. Part of my work there was to document the lives of people who lived along those new tracks, knowing in some way those lives in those places would never be the same. I've seen since farmers markets and small mom and pop businesses pop up at these newly created stops. I've also seen the neighborhood increase in rent, so people who called East LA home could no longer afford it. In my heart, I knew I was photographing what would soon disappear, both people and places. Nothing ever really stays the same, does it? I wrote in my proposal for the Lange Fellowship back in 2010, I said I wasn't interested in politics, I was interested in people. And that's still definitely true. My stories are still driven by people, but it's a lot harder to sit here today in 2021 and find a corner of our culture or lives where politics hasn't had an influence. Ken asked how the Dorothea Lange Fellowship changed me. It helped me find my voice. It helped me come back home. And it also gave me permission. There's all kinds of stories we can tell with our cameras, right? And they're all driven by curiosity, but these two were deeply personal for me. Quinceañeras more culturally, East LA more geographically. These projects don't happen without them, and it doesn't happen without our mentors. And for me, that was Ken Light and Aurelio Jose Barrera. I promised myself whenever I got the opportunity, I would tell everyone far and wide about Aurelio Jose Barrera and his work. He died last year. He was a Pulitzer Prize-winning photographer who cared deeply about making sure that Latinos in East LA were portrayed with the dignity and full of life as he saw them through his lens. And that's something I try and follow in my work. I still do a lot of this work for the LA Times as a video journalist. Here's a quick 1-minute video where writer Luis J. Rodriguez reads his poem, Love Poem to Los Angeles. I did my best to capture this city we call home.
I love LA. I can't forget its smells. I love to make love in LA. It's a great city, a city without a handle, the world's most mixed metropolis of intolerance and divisions. How I love it, how I hate it. Suit Suit Riots, Can't Stay Away, City of Hungers, City of Angers, Ruben Salazar, Rodney King, I Like to Kick Its Face In, Bone City, Dried Blood on Walls, Wildfires, Taunting Dove Whales, Car Fumes and Oil Derricks, Water Thievery, with every industry possible and still in one industry town, lined by those majestic palm trees and like its people, with solid roots, supple trunks, resilient.
All right. And with that, that concludes my presentation. And I'm so grateful to be with all the Dorothea Lange Fellows here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve. You're still showing us what you got.
Thank you, Ken.
And it's really wonderful. Really, really, really appreciate your work. The next speaker is Tristan Sphinxa. And Tristan, I remember you coming into my class as a writer and falling in love with photography. Tristan graduated in 2005. He's a photographer and writer living in Maine. He's a regular contributor to the New York Times, Mother Jones, the Washington Post, and the Audubon magazine, to name a few. He was the recipient, as I said, in 2005 of the Dorothea Lange Fellowship. And I always get excited in the morning, Tristan, when I'm reading my newspaper and I pick it up and there's one of your photographs. It really, it's very, very exciting. So welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks so much for having me. I really only hear that typically from my mom. She'll reach out after she sees that stuff. But it's really wonderful to be here, and it's really an honor to be a part of this. I'm going to dive right into a project, and then I'd like to, kind of walk you guys through it here. This is the concept and the foundation for private property rights in the United States. And it creates a responsibility unique to Americans, one where landowners, not the government, own and control the mineral rights underfoot. In the mountains of Pennsylvania, leasing property for fracking is an individual choice, but one with collective consequences. And this series examines one rural pocket, Lycoming County, the sum of those choices, and the tragedy of the commons. This work was made in collaboration with Colin Jeromack, an author, sociologist, and chair of the Environmental Studies Department at New York University. His book, Up to Heaven and Down to Hell, Fracking, Freedom, and Community in an American Town, will be on bookshelves in April. And it was really an honor to be able to work with Colin on this work. A lot of folks associate fracking and flaring gas wells and people lighting their tap water on fire. And it is that sometimes, although I never saw this during my time. But there's a large pressure that gas drilling puts on the landscape and on the people who live there. Life as you know it mutates into something else when these convoys of trucks and workers and heavy machinery and tankers are invited in. On the left is an empty water truck heading back to town after leaving a fracking site. And what we're talking about are enormous political and economic forces here. The gas boom coincided with the push for us to achieve energy independence. Natural gas is celebrated. It burns cleaner, they say, but it comes from somewhere, and part of that somewhere is here. And how do you challenge such power, especially when it's considered integral and really foundational to American identity? That beating mantra of it's my land and I'll do with it what I want. There are small victories in the fight against fracking, like saving Rock Run in the state forest. Ralph did that. You can see him on the right. He's standing in Rock Run. And this is such a narrow corridor of serenity. Tom and Mary leased their land to the gas company, and they made a lot of money. They bought a new car. They built an addition. They're hardworking, funny, generous, and lovely. Understand that while gas companies exploit many landowners, many also wised up quickly. So we're not exclusively talking about cliches of rural folks, that were unable to read the fine print. And when the things got bad, which in some cases they did, people would say that we made our choices and we live with that. And on the right is the town of Montgomery. And in this photograph, this was made during a community bonfire that was celebrating the start of football season. This town sits only a few miles away from fracking operations, but it doesn't sit on top of the Marcellus Shale Formation, which is the source for the natural gas, so there's no money to be made. I found that the newly paved roads often led to the active fracks, and with a few exceptions, these are usually out of sight. They're just over the ridge, they're just behind the trees. Just below, on the right, just below the photograph of the fracking, sit Tom and Mary and their dog, Ollie, in the backyard. And that's their methane vent. After they leased, fracking contaminate the well water. The vent is designed to stop explosive levels of methane from entering their home. This is a water retention pond in the nearby state national forest. It supplies a portion of the enormous amounts of fresh water that's necessary to support fracking operations. George owns the land on the left, and he hasn't spent a night away from home in decades. He says, why would I go anywhere else? He's a retired public school custodian. He lives alone on a family plot that was passed down to him from his parents. And while he doesn't have a partner or any children, he is like a grandfather to his nieces. He used his gas money to put them both through college. He also built a modest addition to his home, and he bought a new truck, and he bought the kid next door a new riding lawnmower because he admired his ambition with a landscaping business he was starting. But out his back window, he has a view of the well pad and all this heavy machinery. And George gets really angry when the workers come, and they do often to his property, because they're strangers and they are on his land. But that's part of the deal, and he lives with that forever. Cindy is a fierce opponent of fracking and one of the few people who challenged the gas companies. When I met her, she took us up a nearby mountainside to show us an active fracking operation on the summit, and she got emotional looking at the damaged forest. I later learned that Cindy actually leased her land to the gas companies so they could actually drill horizontally from another parcel underneath her land. As it goes, it's hers. It's her land, up to heaven and down to hell. The surrounding landscape was being carved up, and all her neighbors had signed leases and they were cashing their checks. So Cindy and her husband figured they might as well be concentrated too. Kind of a, what difference does it make at this point? Hunting is big here, as are youth sports. This is where Little League Baseball was born. It started in Williamsport, the largest town in Lycoming County. And Williamsport hosts the annual Little League World Series, which is on the right. On the left, Ed and his daughter drag a dead deer uphill to find level ground in order to gut it. He works in the gas industry, hunting-wise. He has a strict constitution about eating what he kills, and he doesn't waste anything. This day, he was teaching his daughter how to deer hunt with a rifle. He sees fracking as beneficial for hunting, which he prioritizes because he likes it because the animals tend to congregate on the edges of the deforested pipeline corridors. In a region where everything seems to be fair game for hunting, either for trophies or for food, timber rattlesnakes are highly revered and they are protected. It's illegal to kill them. So you could level an entire forest, but do not kill any rattlesnakes. And on the right is the former mayor of Williamsport, Gabe Campagna, who served 12 years through both the gas boom and the bust. And he was a big, big supporter of fracking. He touted the economic benefits. What stands out to me kind of anecdotally and maybe represents a larger ethos in regards to valuing wildlife was that there was a huge flock of crows in Williamsport, and they would gather in a big grand pin downtown. A friend in town told me that the mayor proposed cutting down the trees so the crows would go away. I was asking if there was a place where the Marcellus Shale Formation, which again is the source of the natural gas and the big draw for this boom, where is there any place where the Marcellus Shale Formation is visible above ground? And they said yes, the interstate off-ramp out by the mall, which is photographed on the left. And then one night, a local hunter, Bob, took me to his hunting club's land, which overlooked an active fracking operation, which is glowing in the background. He pointed to this old falling down tree stand. In the photograph on the right, you can see it at the very center of the frame. And this is where his buddy used to sit. This was his favorite spot, and he ended up dying a few years ago. And Bob said he'd roll over in his grave if he could see what they've done to this land. You know, I was just kind of stepping back. I was awarded the Dorothea Lange Fellowship 16 years ago. I guess it really feels like yesterday. And I think like launching out of J school and into my career, it was really empowering. You know, there's sort of the rewards in this line of work are deep, but they can be few and far between. And getting started can be so hard, so challenging, and to be associated in any way with Lange and with her legacy. I don't know if I deserved it, but it was really an honor. And I think that, you know, considering her legacy, you know, I think that so much of it continues to hold true, you know, to chronicle the times, to examine our collective state of existence, you know, to embrace a methodology that's just steeped in humanity. And I think that, you know, really just sort of being tasked with maybe interrogating these larger truths, and just as often these mythologies of the now, like wherever and whenever the now is just something that she put forth. And I mean, I just, you know, look forward to getting back to work. I really appreciate you guys, you know, listening to me ramble here and looking at my work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tristan. Really, really powerful, really beautiful. We miss you at the J School. You're all the way across the country. You have to come back and visit us soon.
Be careful what you offer. Thanks so much, Ken.
And share your work. Just as a reminder, for those of you who might have questions about Dorothea Lange's legacy or individual questions to any of our panelists, you can post those questions in the Q&A button on the Zoom call. We'll have time for lots of questions and hopefully some answers. Our next guest is Wassam Al-Badri, who is a very close friend of mine, and we go way back. Wassam was a student at the San Francisco Art Institute, and I convinced him through many conversations, although he wasn't that hard to convince, to join us at the J School and do his graduate degree. He's a social documentary photographer and an interdisciplinary artist. His work focuses on photo reportage and documentary. He creates multimedia art that challenges and investigates social norms and representation, including the Iraq diaspora and textiles. And he himself is a refugee from the Iraq War and was in Saudi Arabia for many years in a refugee camp before he came to live in Lincoln, Nebraska, where he got in some trouble, but turned his life around and was one of our great students at the J School. He was the recipient of the 2019 Dorothea Lange Fellowship He graduated last year. His work is represented by Jenkins Johnson Gallery. And it's so good to see you, Wassam. And welcome. We look forward to seeing your work.
Thank you, Ken. Tristan and Steve, amazing work. And Clara, I'm waiting, like, amazing photographers. So I'm really excited to be part of this discussion, and thank you for the invitation. So I received the fellowship in 2019. I'm going to presenter mode, sorry. Yeah. And oh, sorry, hold on 1 second. Let me stop video. And okay. All right, can y'all see that? Ken?
Just a picture of you right now.
Okay, hold on, let me see.
So
View, okay, I'm going.
yeah, share your screen with.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm sorry, yeah. Get in there. Okay, perfect, got it.
There we go.
All right, perfect. Looks good?
Great, looks great.
All right.
Thank you.
So thank you. So yeah, so a lot of my work, I go back and forth between art and documentary, photo essays, and I'm interested in telling family stories in particular. I was raised by a single mother, so I'm always attracted to stories that led by women throughout time. And so the story that I'm about to share about the Thunderhawk family is that in 2016, the Dakota Access Pipeline was proposed to go through Standing Rock Reservation, but at the same time, it was proposed to go through Bismarck, about 60 miles away, and it was a prominently white town, and they refused. So the second thing they said, well, let's push it on a reservation. And this is the multi-billion-dollar corporation going against a reservation that their budget can't even, fight them in court. So through that, a lot of people came together to protest, and hopefully to put an end to this. So I was there in August in the beginning of a lot of this, and the gentleman with the hat in the center is Dennis Banks, one of the founding members of the American Indian movement, and he was coming out of the hospital during dialysis to lead people. And so with that, you mentioned earlier that I grew up in refugee camps, and I knew after a while, the media would go away, and they were using force. So the state of North Dakota, mobilized the National Guard, forced people to leave, with the use of violence. And I realized something that's happening there, and I was like, what about what's happening to the families who are actually that's away about 1,000 feet away from this pipeline, and a few thousand feet away from this pipeline. So I met Ron Thunderhawk, and Ron's family actually lives about roughly 1,000 feet away from the Missouri River. And the pipeline is and the first is going through the relative land. So they were not really talking about it a lot. So I approached them through town. I was like, look, I would like to tell you, I would like to tell your story. I would like to work with you, and that's something you're interested in. But there's also this long history with representation of Indigenous people with the media. So, and it's been a 4.5-year project with the family, but it's more of a collaboration between us. And I was really interested in the intimate moment and the love the family have one another, and to show, it's a family like every other family, but at the same time, the things that's out of their control, these corporations going through the land. And when originally was my first fear when I started this project, is that the pipeline would burst and destroy Jen Blackclap, the matriarch of the family, seen on the right, would destroy her property. And with that, they're not gonna pay any, damages. So over time, over the years, we started working together, and how do you build trust, and how do you become part of the family? And that was, to me, was the most important. How can I tell the story of the family and earn the trust and tell a story that they want to see? So we just kept working together over time, and this is over a few years period work. So, and this is the work I propose for the Dorothea Lange Fellowship. And this is the house as it used to sit. And they were, I didn't want to really focus on a lot of dapple, no dapple signs. There was one in the yard, and it was mostly about the family. And Megan, the granddaughter, so there's about 4 generations living under one roof, 14 people living in a 4-bedroom house at that time. And Emilia was just first born, and she was coming home. And as of 2018, October of 2018, Jen's house burned down. She worked her whole life to build this house, and the house burned down to a candle. There was an issue with electric. The electricity was not working. One of the cats tipped over the candle and burned down their home. So, and there is no insurance. There was no way of the tribal government would help her because she is set on her own land. And so she had to, within a week, find a home for her family and everything else. So the trailer in the back is the home, and we will see it. But I also did not want to show, so when I went back after I received the Dorothea Lange Fellowship, I wanted to show the human resilience and beauty and the family, that Jen is trying to keep her family together. And now you see 3 generations in this one image. And this is the new home right now. It's a pull trailer, but it's not enough to fit everybody, during the North Dakota winters, if anybody familiar with those. So, and I wanted to end the image with this. This is Emilia's first birthday. So, a year later goes on. And I didn't, wanted to add the history of representations of Native Americans in the media. I wanted to show a family that's still, with all the struggle, they're still like finding moments with one another and loving each other. After receiving the fellowship, actually, for me, it was more important. It's not about mostly the funding to say. I was excited, but it was to be in the legacy of all the, the 2 photographers that went before me and the one that's going right after. There's this great legacy of all these amazing photographers, and I wanted to be in conversations with them. And pretty much that's all I have to say. I usually have a lot more to say, but I'm gonna stop right there. So thank you.
Thank you, Wassam. Very, very, very beautiful work, and we look forward to having a conversation about it. Our 4th speaker, Clara Mocry, is a 2nd-year student at Berkeley Journalism, class of 21. She's a visual journalist pursuing a master's degree in documentary filmmaking. She also was the 2020 Jim Marshall Fellowship in Photojournalism at the Journalism School. Previously, she worked in the photo departments at Vice and Time Magazine as a photo editor, and she interned at Surfer Magazine. She's an avid surfer. She probably went surfing today, no doubt, in this beautiful weather. Her work has been featured in California Sunday, New York Magazine, Mother Jones, Sports Illustrated, and more. She's a former Division I basketball player at Yale University, where she received her BA in political science. She's a great inspiration to other students at the J School, really pushing them to work hard, and has a wonderful vision. And welcome, Clara. Great to see you and great to have you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Ken. It's nice to see you on Zoom again. I've taken all of Ken's classes, and this semester I ran out of photo classes to take, so I don't get to see Ken every day. So it's nice to see you. And it's great to be here. Thank you for having me. And yeah, wow, it's very hard to follow up the coming behind the 3 panelists that came before me. It was very inspiring to see all of your work. And I haven't actually been able to shoot my Dorothea Lange project yet because of COVID. So your work has really given me some great ideas when I finally do get the chance to travel. So I'm going to share, because of that, I'm going to share the work that I submitted for my application. And then I'll kind of just talk a little bit about what my intended project will be when the time is right. So I'm going to share my screen now. 1 second. Okay. Okay, so usually I would say I shoot my work in color, but when I was thinking about what to submit for the Dorothea Lange Fellowship, I wanted to have a tribute to her and submit a project that I shot in black and white. And these images were actually shot for stills for a documentary that's being produced right now. And at the time that I was shooting it, I hadn't decided yet what I was going to be studying at the J School. So it's kind of really, I've come full circle now that I'm currently in the process of making my thesis film. I didn't think that that was the direction I was going to go into, but so that's just a little anecdote. But so this work was made in Bridgeport, Connecticut. I spent a year on and off photographing and following a man named Roland Whitley. Roland spent a large chunk of his adult life in and out of the prison system. And he has since dedicated his time to mentoring young kids in his community and working with reintegrating formerly incarcerated people back into society. So I'm just gonna go through some of these. This was made when I was living in Connecticut, getting my undergraduate degree. And then the year after, I stuck around on the East Coast and was able to come back to Bridgeport a lot. And so this is on the right is Roland with his son. And then he's with two of his mentees, and he was taking the mentees to a hockey game. So this is their pre-game meal. And this is Roland and his wife and son, and his wife, they've been together almost 20 years, and she stuck by his side during the time that he was incarcerated, and they have a really strong bond. This is some of his friends' children. It's just his house is a big meeting spot, and there's always something fun going on there. And this is Aaron, one of his mentees at this program called Hang Time that Roland participates in, where it's an opportunity for members of the community who've been incarcerated to come and share how their week is going, and there's postings for job opportunities and updates about what's going on for them around the city. And this is Roland's mother. This is a photo of Roland hugging the grandmothers of one of the mentees that he was taking to the hockey game. So let me stop sharing. So the work that I am intending to pursue once it's safe to travel again takes place in Indonesia. My grandparents grew up in Indonesia during the colonial era, and Indonesian culture has been a big part of my family's life living in the States, but I've never had the chance to go. And so getting the Lange Fellowship was really exciting for me, because I've always been so connected to this culture that I've never been able to experience. And so I couldn't wait to, be able to go and connect with my people. And then COVID happened, so things got a little delayed, but I am excited that the committee let me keep the grant money and is going to allow me to go in the foreseeable future. So anyhow, the intended project is that I'd like to travel to Indonesia and explore how neocolonialism persists today by way of the Western tourism industry. And to do so, I'm hoping to spend some time with a few people who work at the big resorts and photograph them, the contrast between where they work and their communities, and spend time with them both at their job and then at home. And I'd like to juxtapose these with my own family photos. My great-grandfather worked for the Dutch government but he was also part ethnically Indonesian. So that my family did have really interesting tension and relationship with the country, especially at that time. When Indonesia gained independence, they had to flee, or they were actually on vacation when it happened, so they just never got to go back. So that's the project that I'm looking forward to pursuing. And that's what I have for today. So thank you for having me and for listening.
Thank you so much, Clara. And now all our panelists will join the conversation. And you are welcome to submit questions in the Q&A area of the Zoom. So I see Steve and Tristan and Wassam, Clara. Here we go. Great. So it's really interesting to think about Lange's work historically and what she did, and what we're doing now. And first of all, your stories are so intimate, and you've gotten so close to your subjects. It's really the work is very, very powerful. One of the things I often think about is how the times have changed. That one of the things that I know Ron Partridge, who was a good friend of mine, who lived in Berkeley, Emma Jean Cunningham's son. Ron was Dorothea's assistant during the Farm Security Administration, and she used to drive Dorothea in the car as she went out photographing. Very slowly, Ron would say. But one of the things Ron would say, that Dorothea would get out of the car and go up to people very slowly. Many of you know that she had polio as a young child, and she had a limp. And so people saw that. She would often go to the children first, and the children were always open to be photographed. And then they would introduce her to the parents. But one of the things she would always say was, I'm here from the government. I work for the government, and I'm here to help. And it's kind of interesting to think, if you said that now, you'd be run out of town. And it really has changed in terms of people's relationships to the photographer. And I'm wondering how each of you have very powerful stories, how you've gained access and trust to your subjects. Tristan, why don't we start with you? The fracking story is a very important and powerful story, and you located these people who were clearly open to you being there. I love particularly that photograph of the deer being pulled up. Just the angle in which you shot it is very, very dramatic. What was your process in working with people?
I think, well, thank you. But I think that I really benefited from a lot of the legwork that the writer Colin Jeromack did, and it was so he laid a foundation. He was working on the project for a couple of years before I was invited in, and so it was like a really kind of strong starting point. And then, like any other, I think like any other, it's just about being a human being, you know. I mean, you just talk to people, and there's one guy in town who has become a really good friend of mine, and I would stay at his house. You know, he was basically, he just knew everybody. He'd grown up in the community, and he was part. You know, he was Ralph. I actually showed a picture of him, and I think it's my third picture where he's standing by the river, and you know, it was just. While he opposed fracking, he would he would had such a great way of talking to people, and so he was really instrumental in paving the way for anything and everything. You know, I'd say, well, you know, I'm really interested in this, and the project kept expanding, and he's like, you know who you should talk to? You should talk to so-and-so, and then that would lead to something. I don't think there's really a formula. I think it's about just being a human being and being like water. It sort of finds the path of least resistance, you know? And so everybody is valid. Everybody is offers potential. And I think just sort of whoever's willing Does that make sense? Did I answer your question?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
Yeah. And Steve, how is it for you, your East LA project in particular? Because that's your home, that's your community, which so often outsiders come into that community and photograph, but you live there.
Right, I lived there, and so it was a little bit easier for me in that respect. Also, I've got to say, when Dorothea Lange said, "I'm here from the government," try saying, "I'm a member of the media," and then seeing how people treat you there, right? Because I think the attitudes about members of the media have changed a lot, and it hasn't been easier. But actually, you know what's interesting? It's weird how these things kind of interconnect. I'm currently working on a story where I'm showing up to a lot of funerals of Latinos who died of COVID-19, of the coronavirus. And oftentimes I'm showing up to these funerals uninvited. Like, these people don't know I'm coming with my camera. And I've had to remind myself and think back about the lessons I learned, particularly the Quinceañera project, where they're also not expecting me, right? Like, I'm seeing them at the churches and I'm meeting them sometimes at the party, and I have to very quickly earn their trust. And that's been something very hard. And I have to give it to Tristan. Tristan is 100% right. It's about being human 100%. Like, when I went to these quinceañeras, and now as I'm going to some of these funerals for folks who died of COVID, it is about being human. And so therefore, I go into the environment knowing that if they don't want me there, if they yell at me, if they say, "get out," I completely 100% understand. Like, I'm maybe different than others. Like, I actually don't try to do very much convincing. I have my pitch for why I'd like to be there and fulfill, like, do the project. But if they don't want me there, I don't force them. And so it is about being human and trying to make that connection, you know, as quickly as you can.
And just so you know, one of our attendees said, will Mr. Saldavar's work be exhibited at a gallery or museum in the near future? I would love to see it and learn from it.
Oh, that's sweet. Yeah, let me know who, and we'll send that along.
It's nice.
Yeah.
Someone asks, what advice do you have in regard to approaching and representing cultures that aren't your own? It's a very, very good question. So Wassam, you photographed a number of cultures that are not your own, but you bring your own experience as a refugee. So how do you approach that, and what do you say to people?
I mean, so my way is I enter any space being polite and humble, you know, like, I know it's not my space. I'm aware of that. And I trust the people I'm trying to work with. And what I mean by that is that they can see right through me, right? Like, there is no, like, you can't really sell people some BS to convince them that you're this. Just be forward. And I cannot represent everything. There's certain things in certain cultures that's not yours to represent, right? Like, that is not something you can do, you know? I mean, like, I can speak as an Iraqi photographer. You can't really just go in, like, there's, you know, and like go into a family and trying to do certain things thinking like you're, like, there's limitations. And I think you should know where to go and be respectful and ask for permission, right? Like, when I usually approach any community, I mean, I worked all over this country with communities. I only worked on 2 stories with the Arab community out of like the 20 other stories I've been working on. And I don't really just pull out my camera when I first show up, you know. I sometimes I see who's, you know, a lot of minority cultures, the oldest person is revered, right? So you find the oldest person and you pitch your story. And like Steve said, if I'm not welcomed, I just thank them and I turn around. I never, you know, sometimes photographers have a tendency to be pushy. It's not your place to be pushy. That's not your space from the beginning. And you have to acknowledge that. And I mean, my way of walking into a place, I don't like rooster up. I call it like, you know, you're walking in, you have to be, you know, you have to be polite and you have to come and plead your case. And I ask a lot of people, because as photographers or journalists, we're really asking a lot of people, you know, like, people have to trust the end product, that your work, you know, because once you take it, it's when the photo editor get it, it's out of your control in a way, you know. So I'm very careful about that idea. And I also been on the other side of representation, you know. I was that one kid with a runny nose in a refugee camp being photographed, you know, like, and I was like, I don't, you know, you don't want to be that person. You don't want to be like a native operative, you know, you don't want to. So I'm very conscious about what I do. And sometimes it's, you just have a conversation like Tristan approach, you build friendships, you know, and through those friendships, you realize what's a go and what's a no-go, like what's the benefit of it, you know. So I hope I answered your question, you know, so.
Yeah, that was good. So Clara, someone asked, I'm wondering if anyone can speak to an experience of having your approach and assumptions about a project change throughout the process of making the work. How do you find the balance between being open to discovery versus having an intention to capture a specific narrative?
That's a great question. I think that whenever I approach a story, whether it's, you know, in a culture community that I belong to or one that I don't, I go in without any assumptions because I know that if I do, I'm going to be wrong. I think the way that I do prepare for shoots mostly is thinking visually and less so thinking narratively. And that allows me to go in with an open mind while also still have an idea of the approach that I want to take creatively.
Okay, good. Someone wants to know, cameras are now ubiquitous in our society and in our lives. How has that changed or influenced your work? Tristan.
I think that it's the best thing to ever happen to photography. I think that it's democratized access to storytelling. I think that expanding that access beyond the limitations of learning what was, you know, a really kind of a tough, expensive entry point. I mean, it still is in a lot of ways, but there are also, now it's a much more, democratized, not to say that word twice, but a much more democratized entry point for it. And I always think about how, like, you know, at a certain, you know, at one point in time in, you know, let's say in Europe, only a small percentage of people could read and write. And then whenever the explosion of literacy happened, you know, where people just like, oh my God, everyone's going to be writing. What are we going to do? You know, I think that what it's done is it's taken, I mean, I still believe in the marriage of craft and concept and, you know, a balance of that. But I think that it's pushed the concept into a realm that is just so unbelievably exciting. And so, yeah, when I hear people, you know, moan and groan and be like, oh, everyone's a photographer now, I just say, thank God.
And I should say, to your point, I mean, for me, sometimes I'll go on assignments where all I have is my iPhone. And so I'll have to, you know, the story comes from there. So it's in a way, the ubiquity of like having cameras everywhere now, it's forced me as a storyteller to like rely less on the tool itself and more on the story. And so that I think always helps.
Great. Wassam, this person wants to put you, you know, I don't know. I'll read the question. As a social documentary photographer, how can we classify the type of photo that Ken Light was shooting in the 60s and 70s? Is it political, social, or does it reflect an era that expresses the American youth rebellion against a conservative society?
Well, you know,
trouble, you know? I
think I know how to answer this, and I think you answered it to me 5 years ago. I approached you when I first was, you know, I met you, and I said to you, I was like, you're Ken Light, and you said yes, and I said to you, you ruined my career, and you got all freaked out. You're like, who's this person walking up to me? And I said to you, I worked in the lower Delta, the border, you know, Appalachia, what else? Yeah, pretty much those three I named. And I was like, every time I went somewhere and I look up who done the work, you're the first person that comes up. And that was done in the 60s and 70s and the border in the 80s. Then you paused and you said, You said, obviously we didn't fix that. It's on your generation now to take that on, you know? And I think, you know, documentary photography, the word changes over time, right? Like, because we're facing complete different social issues now than what you face, you know, in the 60s, it was like the Vietnam War, the civil rights movement, right? And those are like the iconic things we look at as social documentary, where like, you know, you were active, Eugene Smith was active, and, you know, everybody else was active during that time. But I think social documentary, like social issues change with time, certain ones. And I think we have to keep, as photographers, like being aware of certain issues. And sometimes we photograph them and 10 years later, you realize it was an issue that you were working on, but, you know, we didn't have the words for it, you know, like the etymology of like the, you know, the movements, I would say. So I think social documentary is across the timeline, right? It's like it's the canon we all work in, right? But it's defined, like, to me, when I define documentary photography, is a long-term project if it was done in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. And to me, a journalism story is when you go in a day or two, right? Because it's a quick turnaround, and there is long-term photo essay. So right now, it's like I would say it's way more back and forth, you know, and it's on you how you define yourself. So it's, if that helps the person answering the question. Sometimes I go on if different issues, then I come back. So I'm just like, yeah. I'm known for those conversations. So
Someone asked, as you have a rich experience by working for different journals in which their editorial lines are different, what was the most work you have done for those journals that marked you the most? I guess that touched you the most. Is there a story that you did that, you know, at first you thought, okay, it's just an assignment, but it really, you know, touched you deeply?
I think I can think of two things. I don't know if like touched me deeply is the right way to put it, but there are two. The first one was, so I was in your class, and it was in my first year. I actually wasn't even in that class. I think you let me come and sit in on it.
You poached my class.
I poached your class because Jackie Bates was coming.
I think I invited you, actually.
Okay, well then, I guess poached isn't the right word.
Oh, poached isn't the right word.
I joined the class for the day, and I got to share my work with Jackie Bates, who is a photo director at California Sunday, and somehow she liked my work and later asked me if I wanted to do a project for her. And this was about a little over a year ago. And turns out she was like, we're photographing, I'm gonna have you photograph a politician. And yeah, I didn't know if I was gonna know the person or not. And it turns out it was Katie Porter. And I didn't know who Katie Porter was at the time, which is crazy to think about now because she's so remarkable and has done so much in her 1 year in office. But that was like a really incredible experience for me that came from the J School, and that you know, I ended up meeting someone who has become such a big inspiration to me as just a political leader. And so that was something that really stood out to me for a number of reasons. The other story is, it was when I was working at Time, and I was like the lowest on the totem pole, like working with the editing team. And there was the Westminster Dog Show going on, and everybody photographs the Westminster Dog Show. It's like, but it's also a bunch of dogs. So like, you feel like you want to go really bad, even though it's something that's been done a million times. And so my boss at the time had asked me to compile, because I was a photo editor, I wasn't a photographer, so I wasn't going out on assignments. I was the one behind the scenes. My boss, she asked if I could compile a series of images from the wire services that we would publish online. And as I was going through it, there were some really great photos, but none of them really fit together in a way that I was liking. And so I just asked if I could go and shoot instead. And she asked if I had my work done, and I said yes. And so she was like, well, if you could get a press pass by tomorrow morning, and it was like 5 p.m. the night before, you can go, as long as you have all your work done. And I managed to get the press pass, and I managed to get there the next day, and I got to shoot photos that were published on time. And that was a huge honor for me, just to be able to have work published with Time. I was like right out of college. And it was like the first major publication really that I had gotten work published in, that they had sent me, even though I sent myself. So those are two memorable things that stick out to me. And I mean, photographing the Westminster Dog Show is like a dream come true, because I was like touching all the dogs, and I wasn't supposed to because they'd just been groomed. But I was just in awe.
Did you think of Elliot Erwitt while you were photographing?
I thought of a lot of people when I was photographing, for sure. But I was happy with the end result, which is what matters. So
that is what matters.
Those are my two stories.
Tristan, in what way do you see your own work in dialogue with Dorothea Lange's work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know.
Or are there other photographers that you think of when you're out making pictures that have influenced you?
I mean, I feel like everything influences me, to be honest with you. I mean, you know, I'm just like, I'm really insecure about this. So I don't know if I should talk about this, but I feel like a little bit like a, you know, like a golden retriever. I see something and I'm just like, oh my gosh, look at that, you know. I can think of, you know, 4 photographers that I'm looking at on the screen that I'm influenced by, that, you know, that I admire, that, you know, I'm honored to be a part of. I think that I would think that, I don't know, literally I have an entire photo book library of people whose work I admire, you know, and I think that, you know, as Wassam pointed out, you know, and made a really good point, is that, you know, the shifting kind of fluid definition of documentary, the evolving definition of documentary just opens up so much more, you know, and even tying back into like the earlier question about the technology, you know, I think that, you know, being able to sort of synthesize a whole sort of new set of data and ways of thinking and all these influences and have different kinds of conversations, and not just have the same conversation over and over and over again, you know, like how do we evolve these conversations, I think is like one of the most exciting places, to sort of be in whatever documentary means. And so, you know, I look at, I mean, some of the like Terrence Simon's work, oh my gosh, just mind-blowing. You know, I look at, I mean, Trent Park's work out of Australia, like, I don't know, it doesn't even seem fair to have to like name people, you know, I mean, seriously, I should, we only have, you know, such a limited time, but I'm constantly sort of in awe and in admiration of my peers, of people that came before me, of people that are just now getting started, and my mind is just blown. You know, I had to set up a 15-minute limit on my Instagram, which I blow all the time because I'm just like, holy shit, look at this, you know. And sorry to cuss. Do we have like a bleep rule on this?
No.
We're all adults. So yeah, I didn't answer any questions at all. Sorry. That's my answer. Everything influences me.
It's a good answer. Someone asks, how do you answer the question with what will you do with the pictures when someone asks you that? Now, Steve, you're working for the LA Times, so that has to be a big, you know, you're doing something and people say, what are you doing? And you say, I'm with the LA Times. And some people might hate that, right?
I was gonna say, sometimes that might help you, sometimes that might hurt you. I don't know. I guess it depends on who you say, right? No, but it's a big honor for me. I mean, it really is just to have a job in media these days, right? It's very difficult. And so I'm always grateful for that. But even more so for the Los Angeles Times, because growing up, I wanted to be a journalist at the LA Times. Like that was my dream job. So it took me a while to get there, but when I finally did, I'm able to tell our stories in our paper. So that means a lot to me.
Yeah, that must have been really a homecoming in a way, to be at the LA Times, probably growing up seeing it, and how they photograph community. And I know you might want to talk about that wonderful little book that you guys did at the LA Times.
Oh yeah, the Chicano Moratorium.
Chicano Moratorium book. It's fabulous. Thank you for sending it to me.
No,
I bugged you, like, send it to me.
Yeah, Google Chicano Moratorium zine, and it'll be in our shop. I recommend folks check that out. To your question about photographers that are, are inspiring us, I've got to say, we went over Robert Frank in your class, and that was a big impact. And for me, while I was doing my Lange project, connecting with Aurelio, he had a whole photo essay of East LA on people in Chavez Avenue, where it's just people carrying their groceries across the street. It's people waiting for a haircut at the barbershop. It's people who are living their everyday lives in these unremarkable moments that make them remarkable. And for me, that's inspiring to me. It's like moments that people wouldn't think would be worth the photograph actually are. And it's coming from photographers who want to show those moments because for so long they've been ignored, right? And I have to say, Tristan talked about an inspiration for all of us here, like other Lange Fellows. When I was in your class and you mentioned this fellowship, I immediately Googled it. I'm like, this Dorothea Lange Fellowship sounds really cool. Doing my research, going through everybody else's bios that came before me, looking at their work, right? And seeing the conversations that they were having. And I have to say, when I was so fortunate enough to be a fellow, even those that came after me, I would get phone calls from people or emails going, hey, I'm a fellow. I'm the fellow that comes right after you, or, whatever. I saw you on the website. And they wanted to have not only just like there's not only a figurative conversation happening amongst yourselves, but also sometimes a literal one as well.
That's nice. That's really, really nice to hear. Someone asked, what matters more to you, illustrating a story or making a great photograph? Wassam, what do you think?
Well, I think photographs first. I think if I make a certain amount of good photographs, I can illustrate a good story. And that's it. So I usually think photographs first, and I'm answering another person, which is important text. Oh, do you need to be a good writer to be a photographer? And I don't think you have to be a great writer. I think because that's why we're all visual people. There is great writers who can do both, but to me, it's actually making a good photographs, because with enough amount of great photographs or good photographs, you can do a good illustration of a story. Because I don't know, I never think illustrations first. I go in always thinking photo first, and I have wandering eyes. Like every time I enter a space, I'm looking at the window, the light, like, like my eyeballs keep going back and forth. Like I'm just trying to calculate how can I make it. And on that, it's like somebody said, color or black and white. It just depends on how much time we have. If I have enough time to do a black and white essay, I would. But I think it's just an aesthetic thing these days, right? Like if we're gonna do color or black and white, it's up to you. I think like Claire's project, black and white, is like, it puts you in that like class, like the traditional classical, like Eugene Smith style of like documentary photography. Like I know that story is there. And it just depends on your end product. I think I never really, and there's a lot of great photographers. I always joke, and I'm sorry to say it, but if you can't color correct, you just switch it to black and white, and I tease my friends about that all the time. But I think sometimes, we just have to, I don't think, like an editor would work with, if you send them a black and white photo essay, they're going to run with a black and white photo essay. And if you're going to send them a color one, they're going to run with it. I tried to send mix and they said no. So, just.
But also, Wassam, I'm glad that I'm not the only one who like goes into a room and immediately starts like figuring out where is the picture.
Yeah.
Like, even when I don't have a camera, and even when I'm not on assignment, I'm going into a room going, where's the light?
Yeah.
Sometimes it is definitely a curse, Steve, isn't it?
Yes.
Especially if you're with your partner or your wife or a friend, right? And you say, wait a minute, I see a picture, and you have to pull out your cell phone. As Tristan was saying, oh, this is an Instagram moment, or, you know, I have to capture that light.
Exactly.
It really is an exciting part of being a photographer. Absolutely. So someone asked, what am I doing next? So I'm going to do my little pitch. I have a new book coming out that's being published by Steidl called Course of the Empire. It's 10 years of photographs starting in 2011, ending with the inauguration of Biden, looking at America all across the country. And I'm very excited about it. I didn't think I'd ever find an American publisher, and I know we all face this. You know, we do work, and who's going to publish this? It's too tough, or, you know, they're not going to use a lot of the photographs. But it's a very exciting project. 209 photographs in the book. Going to be a pretty big book. Any last thoughts from all of you here? It's great to have you all together. We need to have more reunions, I think.
More reunions, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hopefully in person.
Hopefully in
soon.
person.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think, you know, just being able to, you know, this is the first time I'm meeting, you know, meeting you guys, and it's just blown away by your work, you know, and I know some of us share some mutual friends, and I'm just, you know, finally getting to talk with you guys, and I just can't, you know, just one more thing to look forward to once we get past this pandemic, you know, it's just been really wonderful. I mean, we can really exist kind of in a bubble, you know, and just in this line of work, depending on where you are in the world. I live in a pretty rural pocket of the country. So I love these conversations, and just a real honor to be alongside you guys.
And Berkeley Journalism does have a lot of different events. All of them are on Zoom now. So those of you who are joining us, who are not on the mailing list, you should go to our website and check out the events that we have coming up. Really, really wonderful, variety of different speakers. And I'm hoping that our new dean, Geeta Anand, is going to join us.
Yes, I'm here, Ken.
There she is. Welcome, Geeta. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for your leadership of Berkeley Journalism. And it's great to have you.
Well, I want to thank you, Ken, for hosting this wonderful event, and our audience for just your passionate participation with all of these great questions. And to you again, Ken, and you, Steve, and Tristan, and Clara, and Wassam, just hearing you talk about the passion, the care, the humility, the honesty with which you approach your subjects just makes me proud to be a journalist, and makes me so proud to be Dean of Berkeley Journalism. And at this moment, when there's so much distrust in the media, I think it's so important for people to hear from you about your work and the care and honesty and transparency and great skill that you bring to it. So thank you. I know that the audience has enjoyed and is as inspired as I am by all of you. Let me thank our co-hosts, Berkeley Arts and Design and Shannon Jackson, for inviting us to co-host this event. And on behalf of Berkeley Journalism, you know, I couldn't be more thrilled to be here with you tonight. And thank you all so much for leading us in this conversation and for participating in this most inspiring evening. Good night.
Good night. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. What a wonderful event. Thank you.